Walter was a World War II veteran with days, maybe hours left. The family gathered, but his voice was weak, his eyes fixed on one request. He did not want speeches, ceremonies, or even prayers. He wanted Buddy, the golden retriever who had never left his side in life. When Buddy was finally brought into the hospice, the room fell silent. Nurses paused. Relatives stared, because the reunion between an old soldier and his loyal dog was not just touching, it was unforgettable. Buddy's head pressed into Walter's chest, paw resting on his hand as if to say, "I'm here." And in that moment, Walter found the peace no human words could give. Like, share, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment. Walter had lived 82 long years, carrying within him the stories of a generation that had endured the unimaginable. He had marched across Europe as a soldier, returned home to farmland that seemed smaller than his memories of battle, and built a quiet life defined by resilience. But now, in a hospice room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers, his body was betraying him. His breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest measured by the steady hiss of oxygen tubes. The family had gathered, but their presence was heavy, not comforting. His eldest son sat stiffly in the corner, scrolling through his phone between obligatory glances. A daughter-in-law busied herself with paperwork, asking about funeral plans before Walter had even left the room. The grandchildren whispered, more fascinated with the idea of death than the man lying before them. Their voices blended with the mechanical rhythm of the machines, creating a background noise of detachment. Walter's eyes, however, were not on them. They were fixed on the small, cracked photo frame on the table beside his bed. Inside was a younger man in uniform, himself, with a wide grin, one arm slung around the neck of a golden retriever pup with fur as bright as the sun. That pup, now graying with age, was Buddy. For years, Buddy had been Walter's shadow, his companion in early mornings and long evenings, his steady heartbeat when loneliness threatened to swallow him whole. When the hospice nurse leaned over to ask softly if there was anything he wanted in these final days, Walter's voice, though weak, was steady. "Buddy," he whispered. His lips formed the name as though it were a prayer. The nurse paused, expecting him to ask for a priest, or perhaps his medals. Instead, Walter shook his head slowly, eyes never leaving the photograph. Not family, not speeches, not prayers. "Buddy, I want Buddy." The room shifted. His son looked up, brow furrowed as though insulted. The daughter-in-law scoffed under her breath. One of the grandchildren asked, "Buddy?" But the nurse understood, her gaze softening. She knew the dog. Every staff member did, from Walter's stories. They had heard about Buddy's patience, his protectiveness, the way he refused to leave Walter's side even when the old man struggled to walk. But hospice had rules. Animals were not permitted inside except under rare circumstances. The head nurse frowned when told of Walter's request. "We've never allowed this before," she muttered, arms folded. "The risk, the sanitation—" Her words faltered as she glanced at Walter's frail frame, his eyes fixed with more clarity than they had in days. This was not a whim. This was his last tether. The debate began quietly in the hall, hushed voices weighing policy against compassion. "It's just a dog," one aide said. "He won't even notice." But another older nurse shook her head. "He notices. Look at his eyes. That's not just a request. That's his whole heart." Back in the room, Walter's breathing grew ragged. His hand trembled as he reached for the photo, fingertips brushing the glass. In his mind, he wasn't in the sterile room surrounded by indifferent family. He was back on the porch, the smell of hay in the air, Buddy's head resting on his knee. He could hear the steady panting, the quiet reassurance of a friend who never judged, never left. The family muttered their disagreements. His son argued, "Dad needs peace, not a circus." The daughter-in-law said, "It's unsanitary." But none of their words reached Walter. Only the silence between his breaths, the weight of a final wish unspoken too long, filled him. Finally, the head nurse returned, her expression softened by years of experience and the wisdom that rules are sometimes meant to be bent. She nodded once. 10 minutes. The courtyard entrance, supervised, Word spread quickly through the staff. Some shook their heads, but others whispered of the bond between a man and his dog, a bond unbroken even by time. For Walter, those 10 minutes would be eternity. Somewhere outside these walls, Buddy was waiting, muzzle gray but eyes still shining with the fire of loyalty. As the decision was made, Walter's lips curved into the faintest smile. His eyes closed briefly, a single tear tracing down the lined grooves of his face. For the first time in weeks, his breathing steadied, as though the promise of Buddy's presence alone was medicine. But as the family shuffled in irritation, whispering among themselves, no one in that room knew how much the arrival of one dog would change everything. What waited at the threshold of that hospice was not merely a reunion. It was a moment that would echo in every heart present, altering the way they understood love, loyalty, and final goodbyes. Walter's hand clenched weakly around the photo frame, his thumb pressing against Buddy's younger face in the picture. His voice, faint but resolute, slipped through the oxygen hiss. He's coming. And at that moment down the hall, the sound of paws on linoleum began to echo closer. The hospice corridor stretched long and sterile, its pale walls lined with framed prints meant to comfort but failing to mask the scent of antiseptic and age. Walter's breaths grew shallow, his frail body leaning into the nurse's steady hand as they wheeled his bed toward the courtyard. His family trailed reluctantly, some muttering, some silent, their faces etched with discomfort that had little to do with grief. At the far end, double doors opened onto the autumn light. The courtyard was small, enclosed by brick walls draped in ivy, with a few scattered benches beneath trees already shedding leaves. A crisp breeze rustled through, carrying the faint sound of birdsong, a stark contrast to the still air inside. Nurses and aides gathered quietly at the edges, curiosity pulling them to witness what had been deemed impossible. Walter's eyes searched, scanning past the trees, the benches, the sterile glass windows. Then he saw him, Buddy. The golden retriever stood at the far gate, his coat dulled with age, but still catching the light in streaks of gold. His ears perked, tail stiff at first, then wagging slowly, uncertain, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. His handler unclipped the leash, glancing nervously toward the staff. The nod came, and the leash fell slack. Buddy surged forward. His gait was not as swift as it once had been, his joints stiffened by years, but his determination was unwavering. Each step carried memory, long walks on farm roads, evenings by the fire, mornings spent side by side. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath as the old dog closed the distance. Walter's hand trembled on the blanket, reaching forward instinctively, though Buddy was still yards away. His eyes, clouded by age, widened with recognition, tears slipping free down his cheeks. "Buddy," he rasped, voice cracking, the name breaking through years of silence like a hymn. The golden retriever reached him and, without hesitation, leapt gently onto the edge of the hospice bed. His weight careful, his instinct precise, he pressed his muzzle into Walter's chest, whimpering softly, a sound that carried both joy and grief. His paw, scarred and worn, rested across Walter's frail hand as though claiming it for his own. The room around them ceased to exist. Nurses blinked back tears. Even the skeptical son lowered his phone, watching with something almost like shame. The oxygen hissed, machines blinked, but none of it mattered. Only the reunion, man and dog, soldier and companion, existed in that fragile moment. Walter's breathing shifted. What had been shallow gasps became deeper, calmer, steadier, as though Buddy's very presence rewrote the rhythm of his failing body. His fingers tangled weakly in Buddy's fur, gripping it as though to anchor himself to life, or perhaps to peace. His lips curved into a smile not seen in months. Lines of worry smoothed by the weight of love returned. Whispers rippled through the staff watching. One nurse clutched her clipboard to her chest, eyes wet. Another whispered, "I've never seen him so peaceful." Even the head nurse, stern and unmoving, dabbed discreetly at her eyes. It was not just a reunion, it was a miracle stitched together from memory and loyalty. The family stood awkwardly nearby, some shifting guiltily, others captivated. One grandchild whispered, "He looks happy." The son's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed something unspoken, regret, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he had long ignored. Buddy's head rose and fell gently with Walter's chest, sinking with the slowing rhythm of his heartbeat. Each whimper was a promise, each nuzzle an oath. I am here. I will not leave. The wool blanket beneath them carried their shared warmth, weaving the living and the dying into one quiet story. Walter's hand shifted, brushing against Buddy's collar, the worn leather soft from years of wear. His thumb pressed against the familiar tag, the engraving faded, but still there. Buddy. The old man whispered the name once more, weaker now, but filled with everything words could not contain. The courtyard fell utterly silent. Even the breeze seemed to pause, leaves caught mid-drift as though unwilling to disturb the moment. The air carried not sorrow but reverence, the kind of silence reserved for sacred places. But then, in that silence, Buddy's body stiffened. His ears pivoted, head lifting slightly from Walter's chest. His tail froze mid-wag. A low guttural sound rose in his throat, startling in its suddenness. He was not whimpering now. He was growling. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The family stepped back instinctively. Walter's fingers tightened on Buddy's fur, his clouded eyes shifting with faint confusion. This was not the reaction he had expected. Buddy, ever gentle, ever loyal, had never growled without reason. His gaze locked across the courtyard, fixed not on Walter, not on the nurses, but on someone standing at the edge of the gathering. A figure half hidden in shadow, watching intently. Buddy's growl deepened, his body angled forward protectively across Walter's chest, and in that moment everyone knew. This reunion was not just about goodbye. Something darker lingered in that courtyard, something only Buddy could see. Buddy's growl rolled through the courtyard like distant thunder, low and unrelenting. His golden fur bristled along the ridge of his back, his stance protective, his paw still draped across Walter's frail hand. Nurses froze, eyes darting between the trembling veteran and the old retriever who had suddenly transformed from gentle companion to guardian. Walter stirred, his cloudy eyes searching Buddy's face. The sound was foreign. Buddy had never turned that voice of warning toward family or friend. His lips trembled as he whispered, "What is it, boy?" His voice cracked under the weight of fear and trust mingled together. The direction of Buddy's gaze was unmistakable. At the edge of the courtyard stood Walter's son, Charles, stiff-backed, his arms folded across his chest. His jaw clenched as the dog's growl deepened. For a long moment father and son locked eyes across the space, but it was the dog who spoke loudest, a soundless accusation carried in every rumble. The family shifted uneasily. One grandchild whispered, "Why is he doing that?" The daughter-in-law tugged at her husband's sleeve, murmuring for him to step back. But Charles remained rooted, his eyes narrowing, face taut with something unspoken. His stillness only fueled Buddy's suspicion. Nurses whispered nervously among themselves. One leaned toward the head nurse, her voice low. "Dogs don't growl for nothing. He senses something." The older woman shook her head, uneasy, her gaze fixed on Charles as though weighing every line of his face. The hospice aides exchanged wary glances, the silence charged with a question no one dared voice aloud. Walter coughed weakly, his thin chest rattling with the effort. His hand patted Buddy's fur as if to soothe him, but the retriever's body remained rigid. "Easy, Buddy," Walter rasped. "It's all right." But his words lacked conviction. Deep down, he knew his companion's instincts had never lied. Not in war, not on the farm, not in the lonely nights when danger lurked closer than comfort. Charles finally shifted, taking one step forward, and Buddy's growl sharpened into a bark. Sharp, echoing, undeniable. The sound ricocheted off the courtyard walls, startling a nurse into dropping her clipboard. The bark carried authority, a verdict delivered without courtroom or judge. Walter's breathing faltered. His mind, though fogged by age, began stitching fragments together. Memories returned, the missing checkbooks, the whispers of altered prescriptions, the moments of dizziness that never aligned with his diagnosis. His gaze flicked to Charles, and for the first time, suspicion planted itself where trust had once lived. "Dad," Charles muttered, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "He's old. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's just confusion." His words fell heavy, but no one moved. Every eye was on Buddy, who stood firm, a sentinel unmoved by excuses. The head nurse's brow furrowed. "Dogs don't forget," she murmured under her breath, the words almost lost to the breeze. One aide nodded slowly. "They see what we don't." The staff's doubt was shifting, away from the animal, toward the man under his gaze. Walter's fingers tightened around Buddy's collar, his thumb tracing the worn leather as if seeking guidance. His breath rasped, but his eyes sharpened with a clarity his family hadn't seen in months. "Buddy's never wrong," he whispered. His voice was faint, but the conviction behind it rang louder than any machine in the courtyard. The tension thickened until the courtyard felt like a battlefield. Silence pressed down, broken only by the shallow hum of oxygen and Buddy's steady growl. Charles shifted again, unease flickering across his face, a crack in the mask of indifference. A nurse stepped forward cautiously, her eyes darting between Walter and his son. "Maybe we should," she began, but Buddy cut her short with another sharp bark, his body lunging just enough to rattle the hospice bed. Walter gasped, the sudden motion jolting his frail frame, but his eyes never left his son. Whispers spread like wildfire. The daughter-in-law hissed, "Control that dog!" But her voice quavered, betraying more fear than annoyance. A grandchild clutched her mother's hand, wide eyes fixed on Buddy as though watching a protector unmask a villain in their midst. Charles took a step back now, hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine," he muttered, his voice tight. "If the dog's upset, I'll leave." His tone carried bitterness, but also retreat. Buddy's growl softened, his body still tense, but his focus unwavering, his instincts satisfied for the moment. The staff exchanged wary looks. No one spoke as Charles exited through the courtyard doors, the echo of his footsteps fading into the hall. But the silence left behind was not peace. It was suspicion, raw and heavy, circling like smoke. Walter's chest rose and fell, his breaths labored but steadier with Buddy still pressed against him. His frail hand stroked the dog's fur, comfort mingled with gratitude. But his eyes, though clouded by illness, burned with a question that refused to die. What had his loyal companion just revealed? The courtyard, once filled with the tender weight of reunion, now thrummed with unease. Family members avoided each other's eyes, nurses whispered quietly, and the autumn breeze carried tension in every rustling leaf. Buddy shifted slightly, laying his head back onto Walter's chest, but his ears remained perked, eyes tracking the door where Charles had disappeared. His growl had faded, but his vigilance had not. Walter closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him, but his whisper carried clear enough for those nearest to hear. "He knows. He's always known." And as Buddy's tail thumped once against the bed, the door creaked open again. The courtyard door creaked open, the sound dragging every eye toward the threshold. Walter's breathing hitched, his frail chest trembling beneath the oxygen tube. Buddy's ears shot forward, his head lifting sharply from Walter's chest. A low growl rolled from his throat, deeper and sharper than before, vibrating through the silence like a warning bell. It was Charles again. His figure filled the doorway, his expression tight, his movements calculated. He had not gone far. For a man who claimed he would leave to calm the dog, his return was too swift, too deliberate. His eyes flicked across the gathered nurses, then fixed back on Walter with a mixture of annoyance and something darker. "Dad," Charles said, voice straining toward calm, "I came back to apologize. The dog's confused. He doesn't understand. You're weak. You don't need this stress." His words were measured, but his tone carried the edge of someone cornered, someone defending against an accusation no one had yet spoken aloud. But he barked. A sharp, resounding crack that made several family members flinch. He leapt from the bed, landing heavily on the courtyard stone, body angled between Walter and his son. His hackles stood rigid, teeth bared, the gentle golden retriever transformed into a sentinel of truth. The nurses shifted uncomfortably, torn between training and instinct. One whispered, "That dog sees something we don't." Another nodded, eyes locked on Charles, her voice hushed but urgent. "I've seen him around here late at night, near the medicine carts. Always alone." Walter's clouded eyes opened wider, the fog of illness momentarily parted by clarity. He remembered. Bottles of pills missing. Medication doses that never matched. Nights of unexplained dizziness. He had dismissed them as age, as decay. But Buddy had never dismissed them. The growls, the stares, the unease around his own son, they were warnings Walter had ignored. Until now, Charles stepped forward, jaw tightening, voice rising. "He's an old dog. You're letting him turn you against me. You think I'd hurt my own father?" His words rang with anger, but his hands trembled at his sides. Sweat beaded at his brow, betraying the mask he fought to hold. The head nurse raised her voice, firm and commanding. "Stop right there." Her gaze narrowed, her authority sharpened by decades of caring for those too weak to speak for themselves. "Walter's dog has lived with him longer than any of us. If he says something's wrong, I believe it." A ripple of agreement moved through the staff. Buddy barked again, lunging one step closer. The sound was primal, protective, undeniable. Walter, trembling, reached for the photo of himself and young Buddy on the bedside table. His fingers closed around the frame, and with a quivering breath he lifted it toward the group. "He's never left my side," Walter rasped, voice shaking but clear. "Through war, through life, through every night I thought I wouldn't wake. If Buddy says there's danger, then there is." The silence broke. One nurse hurried from the courtyard, returning moments later with the hospice director and 2 security officers. The daughter-in-law's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. The grandchildren huddled together, confusion and fear etched across their young faces. Charles's mask cracked. His calm facade gave way to fury. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're all believing a dog over me?" His voice shook, his composure unraveling with each syllable. But Buddy's bark cut through his words, drowning them, silencing them, exposing them for what they were. The hospice director's voice was low, but firm. "We've received complaints, missing items, altered logs. Today confirms what many suspected." His gaze pinned Charles with cold certainty. "We'll be calling the authorities." Walter's hand slipped from the frame, falling weakly onto Buddy's head. His breathing slowed, but his eyes held steady, burning with gratitude. "Thank you, boy," he whispered. His lips curved into a faint smile, not at his son, not at his family, but at the dog who had carried truth when his own voice could not. Buddy nuzzled against Walter's chest again, tail thumping once, his body softening now that the danger was exposed. The courtyard buzzed with murmurs, tension uncoiling in waves, but Walter's strength was fading fast. The confrontation had drained him, leaving his body weak, his breaths ragged. Nurses leaned forward, adjusting his oxygen, murmuring reassurances. But Walter waved them off with the last of his strength. His eyes closed briefly, then opened to gaze once more at Buddy. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Until the end." The autumn wind stirred, scattering leaves across the courtyard stones. The folded flag on Walter's bedside table fluttered faintly, the symbol of his service, catching the dying light. The photo of young Walter and Buddy lay cracked but whole, its image bridging decades. Walter's breaths grew slower, steadier, each one more fragile than the last. His family stood frozen, shame and fear written across their faces, the truth laid bare by loyalty stronger than blood. The staff remained solemn, bearing witness to a story that would outlive the moment itself. Buddy rested once more across Walter's chest, his paw gently draped over the old man's hand, guarding him as he had since boyhood. His eyes closed, but his body remained alert, ears twitching at every sound, every breath, every fading heartbeat. And then, as the courtyard held its breath, Walter's chest shuddered. His lips parted, forming a single word, soft and steady, spoken into the fur beneath his cheek. "Buddy." The machines beeped once, then fell silent. But Buddy did not move. His head remained pressed against Walter's heart, his paw holding the hand that had carried him through life. And as the family gasped, as the staff bowed their heads, Buddy lifted his muzzle and let out a sound that carried through the courtyard. Not a bark, Not a growl, but a mournful cry, echoing with grief, loyalty, and truth. It was a sound no one present would ever forget. The courtyard lingered in silence, broken only by the soft rattle of leaves across the stone floor. Walter's chest had gone still, his final breath released in a whisper of his dog's name. The machines had fallen silent, their hum replaced by the quiet weight of the inevitable. But Buddy remained, his head pressed firmly against Walter's chest, his paw resting on the frail hand that had carried him through life. For a long moment no one moved. Nurses stood with bowed heads, their tears unhidden. Family members shifted uncomfortably, the reality of truth and loss pressing down like a stone. The daughter-in-law dabbed at her eyes, though guilt flickered behind the gesture. The grandchildren clung to one another, their innocence shaken by the gravity of what they had witnessed. It was Buddy who broke the stillness. With a low, mournful whine, he lifted his head, his eyes glassy with grief. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing. He pressed his nose once more to Walter's cheek, inhaling the last trace of his scent before settling back down, refusing to leave his master's side. His loyalty, undimmed by death, anchored him to the bed. The hospice director stepped forward, his voice steady, though tinged with emotion. "Let him stay," he said to the staff, who had already moved to adjust the machines and prepare the room. "He's earned this." Heads nodded, and the bustle of procedure paused. This was not a scene for charts or protocols. This was a sacred moment of farewell. Walter's son stood rigid at the courtyard's edge, his face pale, his future uncertain. The truth Buddy had unveiled lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to deny. Authorities would be called. Questions would be asked. But none of that mattered to Buddy. For him, there was only Walter, only the life they had lived, and the love that endured beyond its ending. As night fell, staff gently guided the family inside, leaving Buddy with Walter beneath the dim courtyard lights. Hours passed, but the retriever never moved. He lay curled against Walter's still form, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, as if carrying on the heartbeat that had just ceased. Nurses peeked in quietly, moved to tears by the dog's vigil. "He knows," one whispered. "He's saying goodbye in his own way." By morning, Walter's body had been prepared for transfer. The flag that once sat, folded at his bedside, was draped across him, a symbol of a life of service. The photograph of young Walter and Buddy was placed carefully at his side, its cracked glass now a piece of their story. But when the attendants moved to lift Walter, Buddy stood abruptly, placing himself across his master's chest with a growl so soft it was almost a plea. The hospice director knelt, resting a hand on Buddy's head. "It's time, old boy," he whispered, "but you'll carry him with you." Slowly, tenderly, Buddy was coaxed back. His tail wagged faintly once before falling still. He did not resist, but his eyes followed Walter's body until it disappeared beyond the courtyard doors. The days that followed were heavy with absence. Walter's room stood quiet, his belongings packed away. Only Buddy remained, lingering in the halls as though expecting his master's return. Staff took turns feeding him, sitting with him, speaking softly of Walter. The hospice, once filled with routine, now carried the echo of a story that had touched them all. It was a young nurse, Clara, who finally made the choice. She had been there the day Buddy arrived, the one who saw how Walter's eyes lit up in those final moments. She had no family of her own, just a small house and an open heart. Kneeling before the old retriever, she whispered, "Come home with me, Buddy." At first, he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the empty bed where Walter once lay. But Clara's gentle hand stroked his muzzle, and slowly Buddy leaned into her touch. The bond was fragile, new, but filled with promise. For Buddy, Walter's love had been his compass, and now it was leading him toward a new chapter. The day of Walter's funeral arrived. The flag-draped coffin rested at the front of a small chapel, soldiers in uniform standing in solemn rows. Friends, neighbors, and staff gathered, their faces marked by reverence. And there, at Clara's side, sat Buddy. His coat was brushed, his collar polished, but his eyes carried the same loyalty that had never wavered. When the time came, Buddy walked forward. He approached the coffin, rested his head gently against it, and let out a low whine that broke the silence. A collective gasp echoed through the room, followed by tears. Even the stoic soldiers wiped their eyes. In that moment, everyone understood this was no ordinary farewell. This was a testament. Buddy's presence transformed the funeral. The speeches that followed carried not just Walter's name, but his bond with the dog who had never abandoned him. Stories were shared of their walks, their laughter, their unspoken understanding. The chapel, heavy with grief, became filled with a quiet sense of peace. As the service ended, Clara led Buddy out into the sunlight. He paused once, glancing back, his tail swaying gently. Then he moved forward, each step a bridge between past and future. Walter was gone, but his legacy remained, not in medals or titles, but in the loyalty of a dog who had carried him to his final breath. From that day, Buddy lived with Clara, filling her home with warmth it had never known. He curled beside her chair at night, followed her through the garden, and rested his head on her lap as she read. But sometimes, when the wind rustled the leaves or the flag at the hospice door fluttered, Buddy would lift his head, his ears pricking. And in those moments, Clara swore she could see Walter's spirit watching over them both. Buddy's days grew slower, his muzzle whiter, but his eyes never lost their light. He had given Walter peace and, in turn, found a new place where love could grow. His legacy was not only Walter's, but his own, a story of loyalty, truth, and the unbreakable bond between man and dog. And as we remember Walter's last moments, we are reminded of this truth. Sometimes, the greatest love stories are written without words, carried instead in pause and presence. Loyalty and silence. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances, in loyalty, and in love that never fades. Subscribe for more stories like this and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment.